Hi everybody and welcome to today's video where I'm going to be showing you how I added the skirting boards to my DIY garden room project. This is one of the last videos in this series, so I do hope you enjoy it. I'm going to be showing you how to cut scribes, how to cut external mitres. I'm also going to be showing you the adhesives that I'm using and also the way that I'm actually fixing the boards back to the wall. So I think it's going to be useful, especially if you've never done this before. What you've just seen me do there is measure up for the back piece of skirting board, which is the largest piece in the room and it's the first piece that I'm installing. This is simply just measured end to end and it's a straight cut at either end, so it's the most simple piece to fit. And generally I will cut these a couple of millimeters longer than the measurement that I get from the back wall, and the reason for this is the skirting board bends, so you can usually squeeze it into place, and also it's always better to have it a little bit longer because you can always take that little bit off, but you can't add it back on. So that's just worth bearing in mind. Okay, so once I'm happy with the length of this and that it fits nicely, I'm going to add the adhesive. And as you can see here, I'm just kind of working my way up the board. And I'm doing like a wavy line all the way up, top to bottom, to get a good covering with the adhesive. And basically what this will do, it will give more surface area to the adhesive and it's going to give it an even sort of stick from top to bottom of the board. So you can see this from a different angle now. In my opinion, this is the best way to add adhesive to skirting board, so it is the way I would recommend. Now once you've got that on, you can just offer the board back up. As you can see, I'm just going to bend it into place there and pop it back to the wall. And it's just a case of going along, adding a bit of pressure, getting it pressed back to the wall, and then you can start fixing it in place. Now for this job I'm using a second fix nail gun. It's a DeWalt nail gun that you can see there behind me, and I do highly recommend this tool. I've just bought it recently. I used it for the cladding and the skirting boards. It's a great little tool. What I'll do is I'll leave a little link in the description below, so if you want to learn a little bit more about this DeWalt nail gun and read some other people's reviews, you can click the link and do that. If you don't have access to a nail gun, then obviously you can use manual nails. You could use like lost head nails and a hammer. Also, you could screw this in place. If you do that, you're going to want to countersink the screw holes prior to doing it. One of the major advantages of using the nail gun, apart from it just being very easy, is the holes that are left are very small. So the amount of filling and sanding that you have to do afterwards is also reduced compared with, especially screws anyway, and certainly even just manual nails tend to have bigger heads on them. So you're just going to work your way along and add basically 2 pins to the top and bottom of the skirting board here, and that's going to hold it in place. Generally about every 400 millimeters. It's not that important if you're not hitting a stud here. The nails really are there just to hold the skirting board back while the adhesive goes off. Okay, so we're going to move on to the side wall now, and as you can see here, I'm not measuring from the skirting board, I'm measuring wall to wall again. And the reason for this is we're going to need to cut around the skirting board. So we're running into that skirting board, and what we're going to do is a scribe here. So this is a different cut, and basically we're going to cut the board the same length, but as you can see here, the back edge of the board there has been cut with a mitre. So the thinnest part there, the back edge that I'm removing, that is actually the measurement all the way to the wall from the other end. So to start cutting this out, what we're going to do is just use a handsaw just to cut down the straight part of this, and this is just going to be the easiest way to get a nice straight cut. And then when we start getting to the curve at the top of this pencil round skirting, I'm going to switch to a coping saw. Now the advantage with a coping saw is you can adjust the blade. It's a much thinner, finer blade, and it's a lot easier to cut around corners. In fact, you wouldn't be able to do this with a handsaw. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to use the coping saw and just work around that corner. Now obviously if you're using a different skirting mould, such as something more complicated like Taurus, this is going to be a little bit more difficult and you're going to have to do a little bit more with the coping saw. But the same theory applies. You just got to take your time and just go around them corners nice and slowly with the coping saw. So that angle didn't really do the shape of the board justice there, so I'm just going to show you another one that I cut later on here, and this just lets you look at it from a few different angles, so you can actually see the shape of this cut here and how that would just slot over another piece of skirting board. Okay, so once we're happy with that cut, we can just come in, and again we're going to just check it before we start adding the adhesive. And it's just a case of pushing that scribe onto the corner there, and as you can see, that's really nice and tight, no gaps at all. And then again, just like the back piece, I've cut it a couple of millimeters longer, so you saw me bend it there and kind of pop it into place. And that will also help to close up any gaps on your scribes when you cut it a little bit longer. Okay, so now that I'm happy with that, I can remove it. And one thing I will say at this point is when you are removing it, just be careful of that scribe, because it is obviously much more delicate than the rest of the skirting boards, and it's very easy to kind of bend it or snap it or damage it in some way. Okay, so I'm going to run the adhesive along the back again, and I'm also going to run a little tiny thin bead up that other back piece of skirting, which the scribe's just going to run into. Some people might not bother with this, or perhaps they'll use something different like a wood glue, but we're using a kind of a wet white adhesive here, so it really doesn't matter if it kind of squishes out of the joint, because we can just smooth it over with our fingers. You know, it's gonna, if anything, it's gonna help seal any gaps up. Okay, so I'm just gonna knock it down, knock it back in here, just to make sure I'm completely happy with it. And then it's just a case of going along again, making sure it's pushed back. You also want to make sure it's pushed down to the floor as well, so if you're working on an old floor that's a little bit more uneven, you might need to apply a little bit of pressure to the top of the boards while you're fixing it. As you can see here, I'm just kind of knocking the corner down a little bit. But once I'm happy with the positioning, then I'm just going to start adding 2 pins again every 400 millimeters and just work my way along it. So it's very simple, exactly the same method as the back piece. Just 2 nails, one at the top, one at the bottom. Move along 400, 2 nails, one at the top, one at the bottom, and just carry on in that fashion. Just give it a little tap there just to make sure. A little smooth over with my finger just to remove any of that adhesive. And that's that done. So once that's done, we can move on to this corner piece. And again, we're running into a piece of skirting, so that means we're cutting a scribe. So I'm not going to let you watch me cut another scribe. I've just gone out and done this on my own. And as you can see here, I'm just going to run it into the skirting board. And what you'll notice is this is obviously much too long. But that is actually on purpose, because I wanted it to run past that reveal there so I could mark for the external mitre. So this is going to be a mitre on the corner. Basically, I'm just going to mark up the back with the pencil. And then I'm going to take it outside to the chop saw and cut this at a 45-degree angle. Now, if you don't have a chop saw, you could use a mitre block for this job. However, you know, I've got a chop saw and it is much easier. In fact, I don't think in my entire life I've ever used a mitre block, but I mean, that is what it's for. Personally, if it was a choice of buying a mitre block or buying a chop saw, I would personally just buy the chop saw. It's going to come in a lot more often than a mitre block. Okay, so once that's cut, you can see there the mitre cut on that. I'm just going to measure up the reveal here, because obviously we need to make the other part of this external mitre. So that's going to require cutting again, so I'm just going to go off to the chop saw. And then it's just a case of bringing that back in, slotting it in place, just making sure that it fits nicely. So I'm quite happy with that, I think. And then it's just a case of fixing it together. So this is slightly different with these external mitres. And we're going to use a 2-part mitre adhesive. And basically we're going to fit this corner together before we fit the skirting in place. So the 2-part adhesive is 1 part glue and 1 part spray. So you can see there I've just added some glue onto the small reveal part of the mitre. And then I'm just going to spray the end there of the longer piece. And then with this, it's very simple. It's just a case of holding it together, and you've basically got about 10 seconds while this stuff goes off. So you've got to get it in the right position and make sure your fingers aren't in the glue as well, because you will get stuck to the skirting boards. But, you know, it's very simple, and it does make the job a lot easier, especially when we're talking about closing gaps up on that mitre. And you can see it does a really nice, neat job. Okay, so once that's done, We're just going to slide it in place and just double check it. So the scribe slots over. The mitres lovely and tight. And now it's just a case of adding our adhesive again. So we're just going to run that along the back in exactly the same way. Wavy line top to bottom. And a little bit on that reveal. And there we go, I've moved that out of the way as well now so you can actually see what's happening. And then it's just a case of offering it up into place and just sort of pushing it in to make sure we close any gaps up. I think there was a tiny little gap here, so I think I'm probably just going to give it a little tap with a hammer just to really close the scribe up on the internal corner there and close any gaps on that external corner up. What I will say is, if you've not got a lot of experience doing this kind of thing, you know, go easy doing anything like this, because you could very easily bust that corner bead and crack your plaster and stuff. So if you do need to tap it, just be gentle. Don't go banging it with your hammer. Okay, so once that's done and I'm happy with that, I'm going to fix that corner with a couple of pins. And then I'm going to move around to the scribe part of the skirting board and push that down, get that perfectly in place, add a couple of pins in there, and then just work my way along the piece of skirting board to fit it. Now I will say the other side of the room is exactly the same as this side, so there's no point in me showing you how I did that, because I would just be repeating what you've already watched. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to move on to just filling and preparing for paint. So basically we're going to do that in two ways. The first way that I'm doing here is using a filler. So this is actually a torpe filler. It's the exact same stuff that I used for filling the dry lining, and the only reason for this is I read on the back and it said you could use it for wood, and it was actually a really good filler. And you can actually see here the beauty of using a pin gun. The holes are so small, you just need a tiny piece of filler, smooth it over, and then later on you're going to come back and sand that, and you know, you're never even going to know that there's a nail there. Whereas something like a screw and a big countersunk hole, you know, it's a lot harder to make that less visible. Okay, so the next job is adding cork. We're going to add that around the top edge of the skirting board. Also, if you do have any gaps on any of your scribes or anything like that, you can use a little bit of decorators cork to just fill them up. But do not use the decorators cork for filling fixing holes, because what you'll find is if you use it to fill pinholes or screw holes, it will sink. Once it shrinks, once it dries, sorry, it shrinks and it'll sink into the holes, and once you've painted it, you'll be able to see where all those fixing holes are. So always use a proper filler for filling the holes. But this is very simple. You're just running it along, and then you're just going to run your finger along it. It's not like silicone, which can be really messy and difficult to get neat. This is actually very easy. It goes on in a nice straight bead, and then you can just run your finger along and it just kind of smooths out and makes a nice transition between the top of the skirting and the wall. So you can actually see that transition here, and you can also see that I've added some masking tape down to allow me to paint the skirting boards. Now, I didn't bother filming the painting because I'm no professional painter. What I can tell you is I started by cutting in on the top edge, and then because I had my masking tape down, I could be a little bit more liberal on the front just with the painting, and then once it was all dried, I peeled the masking tape off. But here you go, this is the finished result. You can see what it looks like now. I'm very happy with it. I think it gives a really nice contrast to the rubber gym flooring. And yeah, I'm very happy with how this has turned out. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one, guys.